Hello and welcome to today's session where we are going to be uncovering the latest scams that are rocking the contact centre and how the industry is tackling this challenge. Now, this is going to be interactive, so please do get ready for polls and also using the Q&A and chat. So please have those windows open and let's see where we go. So I am no expert on this at all. So I am pleased to say that today, sharing the screen with me are three people that know a thing or two about fraud. So first up, we have Pauline Smith, who is the Director of Action Fraud at City of London Police. Now, she's been responsible for action fraud for the last 10 years, following a career working in contact management in the police force. And little known fact, because she doesn't shout about it, but she was awarded an MBE in 2009 for her services to policing. So welcome, Pauline. We also have on our screen Mark Williams. Now, he is Financial Crime Manager at Optimus Cards, which is, Optimus Cards is a fintech business where Mark manages the financial crime function and works closely with customer service. Now, he is a financial crime professional who has witnessed firsthand the devastating impact on the victims and is a champion of fraud prevention, and has also been working in the police. We've also got Tim Burton, who is Chief Product and Success Officer at Smart Numbers. You also, Tim, have firsthand experience of being controlled by a fraudster. And you've spent the rest of your career to date trying to help contact centres be more secure in the fight against fraud. So we've certainly got some expertise on the line with us today. So welcome to you guys. Okay. So, thank you so much for joining us. And as I say, this is an interactive session, so please get ready for some polls and please do use the chat. If you've got any comments you want to share, any experiences you want to share, please do put them in the chat. Our guests are monitoring the chat too. And if you've got any questions for our panelists, then I will put those to the panelists. If you can put those in the Q&A, I'm going to be monitoring them over on the side over there. So we know that it's widely reported that fraud is on the rise. And in fact, I understand it's above pre-pandemic levels, according to some experts. Now, I did a little bit of research to find out what the top 10 fraud trends are in 2024. And interestingly, they're split into two camps. So I'm going to tackle the first five first. And it's more about the vulnerabilities and where they are. So number one, automation. This makes it easier for criminals to exploit users' accounts while remaining undetected themselves. Maybe think about that one. Number two, account takeover. This is a type of identity theft that occurs when a fraudster gains access to your or your company's computer accounts, email accounts, and other personal information. I've been a victim of that. I've had my Instagram account stolen. So that whole piece around it won't happen to me. I think that's not true. The third piece, the adoption of new digital payments and methods. Technologies are enabling new ways to pay, but they are also opening up new avenues of attack. They steal the credentials, and it's so much easier to carry out fraud and ID theft when it's particularly a new digital payment. So you might need to bear that in mind if you're bringing in new payment methods. There is a rise of synthetic identities. Now, this was very new to me. Maybe for some of you, it's not so new. But what I found out about this is that fraudsters are taking bits of legitimate data. They're adding fictitious information and creating a new identity. That's on the rise. And then the other piece is targeted attacks, where cyber criminals compromise or a target entity's entire infrastructure. We have seen that. We question whether we're seeing that in some of the major organizations at the moment, but that is certainly on the rise. Mark, is this what you're seeing in your contact center? How are fraudsters doing this? Those 5 things I've just talked about, how are they doing it in the real world? And in particular in the contact center?
Yeah, so I guess to start, you asked about our contact center. We're actually in a very fortunate position. We seem to be faring very well, actually. That being said, you used the phrase earlier, it won't happen to me. And that's a very common thing. And when we were talking before about the subject of this, fraud in the contact center, it actually took me a minute to think, what does it look like? How does fraud impact the contact center? And the reality is, a lot of fraud that impacts the contact center, the people it impacts won't know it's impacting them. They won't know the role they play in that. They won't see the results of that. That being said, though, it's there is a real issue to sort of be focusing on there. So first of all, I guess that the main controls for an organization in relation to fraud tend to be really good network security, and also robust and well calibrated fraud controls. And they're kind of the big ticket items. A lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of knowledge goes into that. The contact center, that is the gateway of the organization, and that's where a lot of the data is held. So these people at the front line have two things. They have access to information that criminals would be interested in, but also they have the ability to corrupt a system. They have the ability to actually bring something into the organization. And I'll talk about the social engineering side and how that's kind of how maybe the contact center is a little bit more vulnerable there. It's fair to say one of the most exploitable resources and most exploitable defenses is humans. Computers generally a series of ones and zeros, things go through or they don't go through. With humans, we have that emotion. We can be manipulated. It happens a lot. We don't naturally, we think we're not going to be manipulated because it's not the way we think. We're not predisposed to thinking that I'm going to get caught out here, Lee's going to have her account hacked, but it does happen, and that's the big vulnerability that gets exploited, the fact that we just don't see it coming. So
tell us, Mark, about the social engineering. How do fraudsters try to manipulate? What are the kinds of things that they might do? What will they say to you as a frontline advisor?
So the thing there is, when you are social engineering someone, when you're manipulating someone, it has to be bespoke. It has to be sort of dynamic. You can do kind of on the hoof, and it depends who you're talking to and what your objective is as well. So it may very well be that a criminal is looking to access somebody's bank account, and that's one of the broadest types that we tend to see here. Somebody wants to access information to get a customer's data to take over their account. And one of the ways criminals might do that is they will contact the organization. They will want to obtain information that's going to allow them to do that. Whether it be given the ability to change an email address or a telephone number or something, and by changing a telephone number, you then can maybe load Google Pay onto your device, and then that's when a fraud starts. But how do they do it? Well, I mentioned social engineering. It is a bespoke technique. When you pick the phone up to somebody, how are you going to get past this person? Do you pick up on the fact they're actually quite timid at first? So if they are putting the blockers up and they're following their process, do you start bullying them? With the intent of kind of getting around them? Could actually be that you sense maybe the best approach is to engage with someone and to build a bit of rapport and to get them to sympathize, to empathize. You can't access your account. You're going for a tough time. Is that the way to get through? And what they look to do is they look to build that rapport. Again, the objective of it. It may very well be that they are looking to attack your system. It might be that they want to the target is new customers. It's your company. So one of the ways to target a company is to get an email with a Trojan in it, a virus that can attack your system, that can give them access to it. Now, I'm sure most of us will be aware of phishing emails, and we know what we're looking for. When it comes through unsolicited, we check various things to see if it's genuine. But what if we're on the phone to a customer and they're saying, yeah, I'm just going to send you this email through. I've had a problem. Can I send you this email through? Your guard's down. You're thinking, oh, okay, this isn't a random email. I know who it's coming from. It's coming from Mark Williams. Actually, do you know who Mark Williams is? And that's just one of those exploits. How best do you manipulate that person to do what you want? Is it to aid you to bypass the identification and verification, or is it to get them to open a link? So I guess I've really sort of focused on the human element there. But for me, and I know we've, that there are, we'll go into later some of the more technical sides, but actually I think the human aspect is really, really important, and us realizing we are a vulnerability, and that's not a bad thing. It's perfectly natural.
Thank you, Mark. Do you know what? I am going to come back with one of a question that's come in already before we move on. Mark, do you have a view on organised crime rings infiltrating contact centres, e.g., planting colleagues who pass recruitment checks, etc.? And what are the type of controls that have been implemented? Is this the kind of thing that you're aware of, Mark?
Well, so anyone who's looked at my LinkedIn profile will know that I worked in organised crime. I worked in regional crime, organised crime. So I'm always thinking about organised criminals. Absolutely, they do. Having also worked in bribery and corruption as well for a major bank. Yeah, they do. They it, it depends on the motivation. It depends on the goal, what you're going to get from it. Organized criminals, yeah, there is plenty of opportunity and motivation. But this is, again, I think we'll talk a little bit later about the long game with regards to harvesting data. But actually, if you're looking to really, if you're looking for a big win, or if you're looking to really harm an organization, because it's mainly about financial gain, but actually sometimes it's about harming an organization. So by infiltrating the organization, what controls? Um, Plenty that I probably won't go into too much detail about, but it's fair to say, yes, we are absolutely aware of this. We do various checks, and it's very similar to when you want to open a bank account, and there's the due diligence side of things. We do due diligence with employees. We do it with contractors. We do it with suppliers, because actually it may be someone on the phone, it may be someone choosing to work for you, but what about someone who's working for you as a supplier? So there's all these vulnerabilities. But really, really good question. I don't think it's a massive issue, but when it happens, it is a massive issue.
I think that's a key point, Mark, and it could be quite a scary hour this hour as we uncover some of those vulnerabilities. But it is rare. It's not a commonplace, I believe. However, incredibly, 61% of all fraud involves the contact centre at some stage, apparently. And Tim, there seems to be a pattern that fraudsters follow. Did you want to just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. And it actually does tie back quite nicely to the question, because a lot of the controls that are implemented by organizations to combat the phases of the life cycle of a fraud attack are predominantly outward facing, and are designed to protect a customer from external threats. And to Mark's point, once you get in, those controls they're not looking at you, right? So from my perspective, when we look at the way that organized crime touches the contact center, it hops in and out, would be the easiest way of kind of summarizing it. But you would typically go through a process where data is harvested. Predominantly, that's through the things that Mark was talking around, phishing campaigns, data compromises, and there's a variety of information that you'll collect through those different campaigns. But where the IVR and where the contact center is often exploited by organized crime is that there's an opportunity to essentially validate and enrich data. And we call that reconnaissance, but essentially the ability to take the information that you've gathered through one of those harvesting techniques, and to hit essentially an endpoint and validate that information is correct. And give you a kind of a real life example of that. If I've got the year and the month of someone's date of birth, I will hit the IVR and I will go through 30 to 31 different calls until I get the date right. And from a control perspective, most organizations won't block telephone banking, for example, if the date of birth is keyed in wrong. They might put a suppression over a period of days, but they would normally leave it open because it's the last line of defense for customers that are the most vulnerable. Now, at that stage, you'll often have a bigger, thicker data set for a customer that can either be sold on and therefore used in a digital attack, where there's usually a higher amount of traffic, a greater level of allowance for automation within the cyber world, or you'll move one step further and you'll move into what we call a preparation activity. Now, in preparation, often this is where a lot of the time the things that a fraudster needs to do are things that require too high a level of security for an IVR. And so you move into a human to agent type environment. And as Mark was alluding to earlier, various techniques are used to manipulate and engineer the agent to doing the things that the fraudster needs, so they can then facilitate a cash out essentially via an alternative channel. That could be creating a relationship between a digital card and a wallet, so Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, etc. That could be, for example, adding a new beneficiary. It could be changing an address or suppressing notifications. But ultimately, what you're doing there is you're manipulating or preparing the posture of the account to maximize the chances of cashing out the largest amount. And then you'll do that via whichever channel you see fit. And so then you see the cash out occur. The cash out often happens, like I said, in a different channel, so the telephony is not necessarily a part of it. And then you have legitimization. And what we're seeing now is fraudsters that are controlling mule accounts, and most of the time this is not the customer, it's the gang that the customer sold the account onto, are using the telephony channel to check balances, clear funds, and things like that just before they go to the casino and pull the money out, or an ATM and take money out, and begin the layering process of legitimizing those funds through the network. And so there's a whole host of touch points there. And when you think about the controls that you put in to be able to identify that, one of the most important things for organizations is to try and create tangible relationships between the touch points of a criminal across different channels. And telephony, unfortunately, from my experience in particular, has been hugely underinvested in, and therefore, there's fantastic omni-channel synchronization between internet banking and mobile banking, but branches and contact centers have been, left out in the cold, and therefore the data doesn't stream in. And fraudsters are absolutely now starting to exploit that in anger.
Thank you, Tim. So I think let's go to a quick question for our audience. Let's go to our first poll. So the question is, where is the contact center most at risk? Where is the contact center most at risk? So please take a moment just to put multi-choice, so you can decide how many or where you think the contact center is most at risk. Is it self-service? Is it the voice channel, as we've just been talking about? Is it the IVR? Is it speaking to a new frontline colleague? Is it multilingual interactions? Is it in-app interactions? Is it your own colleagues? Or maybe there's another vulnerability. And if you think there is something missing, please do pop it in the chat. It would be great to hear where you also think the contact center is most at risk. So hopefully you've all had a chance to answer that. So let's take a look at the results. And Mark, I'm going to come to you to get some first reactions to those results. Let's see those results. Oh, do you know what we've had? I had someone call directly and it seemed quite kosher. That's one of the comments in the chat. Right, so the results tell us that 53% say speaking to a new frontline colleague is probably the most vulnerable state in the contact center. Voice channel is up there, self-service channels are up there, and maybe we did cover most of the vulnerabilities. Mark, would you like to comment on those results?
Yeah, actually, it's surprisingly spread. I thought there would be more focus in particular areas, but I think there shows a real awareness there, actually. Yeah, rather, and I think ultimately it depends on the organisation. Organizations that really understand the vulnerabilities in the contact centers really can put those additional resources in there. So I mentioned earlier about the money that goes into network security, the money that goes into the fraud department, but actually engaging with those those frontline resources really does sort of reduce that risk. Today, for example, I've been in my regular cadence with our contact center team, including our outsourced contact center team. We really put a lot of effort into those conversations so they understand the risk, they can feed back to us. So as such, I would say our organization, those particular, those in-person contact channels are probably reduced. Yeah, and honestly, I wouldn't know where to start to actually quantify where does that risk most sit. It might very well be that looking at a quantifiable point of view, Tim might have a bit of an idea.
And one of the questions we've had in is, if you had to choose one, which one do you think would be the highest at risk? Arguably, you've just kind of answered that. I am going to go to another question that we've just had in. We see web chat as part of our contact center operations. So do I, by the way, and had previously seen this as being a target for fraudsters, as it is easier to avoid detection. But actually, i.e. Mrs. Smith, but actually is a male fraudster. So that coming in as it's a male person contacting as a female. Is this a growing trend in other operations? Do you know what? Mark, give us a quick answer on that.
Yeah, it's not something I've seen, to be honest with you. Yeah, that's going to be a difficult one. I'm going to
You're making a note of that.
Yeah, and I might actually chuck that one out to see if anyone else got any thoughts on that. But I'm not. Yeah, I'm not quite sure on that one.
No, that's okay, Mark. So so here you go. One for you guys. Is anybody seeing web chat and people basically going onto their web chat and pretending to be someone else? So please do put in the chat what your experiences are. So Pauline, it's time I brought you into the conversation. Now, Pauline, you're at Action Fraud. There's a lot of adverts and advice out there to say if you are suffering or have been a victim of fraud, both personally and as businesses, that they should report fraud activity to you. Tell us, what do you know? And you're currently on mute.
I am as well. Bad habit. Yeah, thanks, Lee. Yeah, we take the calls for the UK on fraud and cybercrime for policing, and it's 40% of all crime that comes in, and it is the only growing crime in the UK in actually the globe. What we don't see though is we don't see reports from call centres. So I've gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, and we can't find any reports from call centres specifically. Wow. So what I would say is fraud is massively underreported. It's not a surprise. People see it as sometimes a day-to-day thing now, particularly organisations deal with it themselves, etc. However, if it's not reported, that means we can't link the frauds together. We're a national service. We are one on its own. There is nothing like it in the globe. So the more information we can get, the more we can get fraudsters, criminals to court, or take down their websites, freeze their bank accounts, and hit them where it hurts. Make it a really difficult, hostile place to work.
So it is no matter how large or small it might be, it is about reporting it. And it's a little bit like in your own neighbourhood where you see something strange going on and maybe someone trying to get into a car and it's midnight and you happen to be opening your curtains and looking out because you hear something and you do nothing about it. But that little piece of information, lots of little pieces of information add up, which arguably is what we heard Tim say the fraudsters do in order to get access to the bigger picture.
Exactly.
So Pauline, at Action Fraud, you are a contact centre. Your career has been in contact management. Surely Action Fraud must be one of the safest contact centres. You're not going to get attacked by fraud, surely.
Well, we are secure. We're very secure. We get DDoS attacks on a weekly, daily basis in that type of attack, and we've got security, as you might expect, all round. However, we are working currently with Smart Numbers because you don't know what you don't know. So Smart Numbers has done a small piece of work for us, just a dip sample, and yes, we have got some fraudsters calling Action Fraud. So we're investigating, as you might guess. We haven't got the results yet, but we want to be the best secure place you possibly can be. And with a little bit of help from our friends, then we're going to be. But yeah, you would not expect it. But it's about data. It's about people's identity. It's about what you can get out of call centres. So it can be used. It can be sold on the dark web. It can be sold anywhere. So that's what fraudsters are after. And they will look for any vulnerabilities, anything that's vulnerable that you can think of, they will look, because it's mainly organised crime groups.
Wow. Do you know what scares me most there is that you didn't think that fraud was happening, and how many other contact centres out there maybe don't think it's I'll come back to that phrase, it won't happen to me. whereas actually it might be. So one question, Pauline, I'm going to stay with you for a moment. On average, how many reports of fraud do you get a month into the interaction fraud, and how many are you able to do anything with? Because obviously, coming back to that, lots of pieces of information build a picture, even if that one report might not be able to be acted on.
Yeah, fraud and cybercrime is very hard to detect. It's difficult to bring offenders to justice. They're mainly, or some of them are not in this country. A lot of them aren't in the country. So it's difficult, always has been. So bringing offenders to justice is not great, and it is around about 4% of what comes in. However, what we do, we get around about 2,000 calls a day, 1 million contacts a year. What we do on an industrial size is we bring down websites. So the more information we can get, we actually stop domains getting published in the hundreds and thousands, and we bring them down. We'll freeze bank accounts on an industrial scale. We'll stop people's money going out if they report it quick enough there and then, and we will take down those phone lines to stop criminals working. So we work with Interpol, Europol, and many organisations, the Home Office, to do the best we can. But it's a tough job, and I'm certainly not going to lie to people and say we bring masses of people to justice. But we certainly do make it difficult, and we do have some brilliant cases that do go to court.
And Pauline, coming back to that every small detail counts. So I reported to you that my Instagram account had been stolen, and you've used that to build a case. So although yes, it meant a lot to me, and it was frustrating, and I couldn't get it back, and all that kind of stuff. But you've actually used that as an example in some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, it's been a great case study, actually. Thanks, Lee, and it's helped with the online security and some new legislation that's coming out. We're also working with the Meta Group and a lot of other platforms to see how they can change the way they do things. And of course, with some case studies with the Home Office back in, we do get that legislation in. It's not enough yet, and I'd like to see more, but it's going in the right direction.
Perfect, thank you. And we've got loads of questions coming in. I am going to try and cover some of those questions off now. So we're going to do potentially a bit of a quick fire round. I love this one. So far, these fraud techniques seem to be well planned, but not ultra high tech. Do agents really get exposed to deep fakes, or is it too difficult to identify? Tim, I'm going to ask you that one. Deep fakes having an impact?
They do, and I think we probably just need to clarify what we mean by deep fakes in the concept of a contact center, because the voice side of deep fake technology has actually been around for a lot longer. I would say there's a couple of things here. Absolutely, we're seeing that technology being used. We're seeing it being used more and more to circumvent organizations that have things like bad voice biometric capabilities embedded, mainly and also passive voice biometric techniques. What we're not seeing, if I'm being completely honest, is the level of investment that we're seeing in that technology in things like KYC and digital scenarios. And I was having a conversation with a senior engineer at an event this week, talking about why they're not seeing that as prolifically as they were expecting. And the main thing they said was that at the moment, our organization has not figured out how to scale the contact center. But we think we're there, and we think we'll be there soon. And when we are there, and a greater amount of what we do moves into self-service, we expect this to come through a lot faster. So I would say that the techniques are being used. They're being tested in other channels where voice is a part, but they're not being applied as aggressively yet, because a lot of what criminals are trying to do still requires a human interaction, and therefore bot to human versus bot to bot it doesn't have the same efficiencies, and therefore there's a limitation to how far that attack can go in terms of scale. But when you're all thinking about how much can I move into self-service and what are those things, just bear in mind that actually the techniques that are being applied in other channels are the ones that will then you'll see coming through. They're directly transferable, and then you'll start to see a greater level of scale attack, from my perspective.
Thank you, Tim. Do you know what? I've just had a little view of all the, or many of the questions that are coming in. One of the questions is, our Action Fraud team direct the customers themselves to report to Action Fraud rather than us doing it ourselves? Is the suggestion we should report along with the customers? So before we answer that, and Pauline, I am going to come to you for that answer, but I'm going to go to a poll because that leads beautifully into, as contact centre leaders, here's the question. As contact centre leaders, who do you currently report fraudulent activity to? So it is multi-choice because it might not be one, but do you report it to, do you not report it? Does it just, you're not aware of it? Do you report it to senior management? Does it go to your fraud colleagues? Do you report it to the police? So does the contact centre report it directly to the police? That might be the case with some of our smaller contact centre colleagues. Do you report it to Action Fraud, obviously? Do you report it to the ICO? So hopefully you've had a chance to answer that question. Who do you report? Where do you report fraudulent activity to currently? Okay, let's have a look at the answers. And Pauline, I'm going to come to you for a first view of those answers and for you to give us some advice on actually where should contact centre leaders be reporting fraud to. So the response. So to fraud colleagues, that's great because many contact centres do have colleagues that are very much focused on fraud. To senior management, absolutely. And there is 9% has said to Action Fraud. Pauline, what should they be doing?
Yeah, report to us. We are there on behalf of policing to take the demand from policing. So either ring us 0300 123 2040 or actionfraud.police.uk. Ping us a line, drop us out, however small or however big. If you can get it on there, it will get into the system. We can't guarantee an arrest, but we're pretty good at the rest of the stuff I described earlier on. And the more information you give, the more we'll be able to get the picture, the national picture, international picture, and be able to do something about it. So by all means, please report it to us. If not, your local police force, because they will also report into Action Fraud. But we're first point of contact for the UK.
Thank you, and I think it's probably worth just building into that people listening, you should have a process for reporting fraud. Now, it could be that it is to senior management who then report it on to fraud colleagues. It might be reporting directly to fraud. There is a process there. It's worth just checking that Action Fraud is in that process. Pauline, I've got a question come in. Should fraud teams be reporting through Action Fraud, or is this done via submission of a SAR?
Yeah, they can do it through Action Fraud because we can deal with SARs as well. So yeah,
what's an SAR?
Somebody will have to remind me on the SAR.
Activity.
Sorry, say that again, Tim.
So it's a suspect activity report essentially. Not to be confused with subject access requests. GDPR, same, lovely confusing acronym, but predominantly they tend to be more focused where you're trying not to tip off the criminal. And when you go down a fraud route and you feel relatively confident that disruption is required, that actually, again, internal process should let you know that in the instance of fraud and where you have confidence that criminal activities occurred, that actually you can report via a number of different means in parallel with an SAR. They typically tend to lend themselves more to the financial crime side of things as opposed to the organised crime and actual individual fraud cases. Mark, you've probably got the greatest strangle on the policy there internally at your org. Yeah,
and we tend to sort of whilst there is overlap, tend to view them as sort of separate things. So from the suspicious activity is we think there is money laundering. That's going to the NCA and saying we think this is money laundering activity. That is about that picture being built, law enforcement being able to deal with the money laundering side. And then of course you've got the fraud side. So what we would do is where somebody was a victim of fraud, we would say, okay, let's report to Action Fraud. They're a victim of fraud. If it's maybe the other way around and we think their account holder is a fraudster, we'd be looking more towards the suspicious activity side. So we'd kind of tend to differentiate SAR, your baddie, crime report, your victim, but quite often those two are very much sort of hand in hand, really.
Thank you. And do you know what? There's a great comment that's come in on the chat. A lot of people working in a contact centre may not have enough knowledge base or experience to be able to identify a fraud or negate any suspicions or any cases that get sent to the financial crime team. And some cases turn out to be not fraudulent or suspicious. I think that's a great comment. That's certainly the reality. I'm just having a look at some of the other questions, which I will come back to in a moment. So, I have to ask you, Mark, what is it that these fraudsters want? Is it all about money? So when I think about my Insta account going, and yes, there was a worry, could they get access to my bank account and everything else? Actually, I was more worried about my identity being stolen. But what is it that they want, Mark?
Yeah, and actually, when you think fraud, so fraud itself is very much related. A required part of it is a theft. A theft is causing a gain for yourself. Generally, people are after money. They want a gain, but it may not be that direct gain. And the point you've just picked up on. So you might want to access an individual's account because you might want to access their funds. However, you might want to be accessing data to sell the data. It all has a value. When you've got organizations that have got poor controls and you have weaknesses that criminals can target, that information in itself has value. There will be people that will pay for that. So it may very well be that because of your business model, it might be that you're extremely techy and you can get all of this card data. But actually, you don't want to get involved in the nuts and bolts of how do you convert that into money. Well, actually, you obtain that data, you then sell that on the dark web, for example. So it is that game, but also it's at loss as well. So, talk about fraudsters. So we're focusing on that game, but the mechanisms are exactly the same. If somebody's looking to exploit and to cause a loss to you, it's exactly the same, whether it's to cause a gain or to cause a loss. Extreme examples, we know that there are foreign states that would seek to harm certain organizations. We're aware that the likes of the NHS have been attacked. The methods, to a great extent, are no different, but the objective is to cause loss or to cause a gain. And when you think about the causing a loss of data might expose someone to sanctions in relation to the data protection side of things. Reputational damage, that's another thing. If you want to damage your company's reputation, especially one that really needs to protect that reputation in relation to their information security, it's a great way to do it. So largely, yes, money directly or indirectly, but we can't forget that actually sometimes it's just to do harm, and also sometimes it's for fun. Why did you do it? Because I can do it. I expose this information because I can. It's everyone's got their own reasons.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the questions that's come in is there really any value in reporting fraud attempts in the contact centre when the vast majority of cases will have no information to provide to law enforcement? And I'm guessing, Pauline, the answer to that is yes, because there may be a small piece of information in there. Go on, Pauline.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, what if they're trying to get data? If data has gone out around individuals, then we can do things around that as well. So if your call centre agent has mistakenly been led into giving information out that shouldn't have been, then that's quite key. And you'll see fraudsters targeting different contact centres to build up a different picture. So if all those contact centres were to report into me, I could build that picture up, and then we've got a really good chance of getting hold of whoever's doing it, or the organised crime group, even better, to bring those down completely. So yeah, it is worth it. It might always not seem like it, but it certainly is worth it in this country to report.
Lovely, thank you, Pauline. So right at the start of the call, I talked about 10 trends, and I only talked about 5 of them. So I'm going to just quickly rattle through the other 5, and they're all focused on how business is reporting is responding to fraud. So ongoing challenge of balancing fraud and customer friction. Now that came up as a comment earlier on the chat, so I am going to come to you, Mark, about that in a moment. Escalating the cost of fraud. It's getting expensive, not just from fraud losses, but you've got to be putting in your prevention tools. There's headcount cost to the customer lifetime value impact. The cost is going up. There's a growing need for multi-layered fraud assessment to prevent fraud in the first place. So it's not just one piece, you've got to do a few things. There is a heightened need for real-time risk assessment because it's happening in real time. So you've got to be on it on real time. So you've got things like fraud detection, ID&V, and authentication solutions. All should be united. This is what I'm learning. Should all be united in order to do that real-time risk assessment. And account security. Organizations are taking a layered approach to account security. I feel it on my own bank account. I feel it in all sorts of different areas where we've got that layered approach. So I am, Mark, going to come to you about the whole balancing customer service and fraud in a moment. But I do just want to go to the final poll of this session. So excuse me while we just do that, because I am really interested to understand what measures are your contact centre taking to tackle fraud? Now, this is a slightly longer question. It is multi-choice, and I am going to read it out to you. So, are you using telephony data to validate the caller's true identity? Are you using strong and effective authentication in the voice channel? Are you using MFA, multi-factor authentication, through your self-service or your digital channels? Are you using voice biometrics? This is something that's been around for a while now as another layer in your authentication. Are you training the front line in how to spot it? That's obviously something we spoke about earlier. What about building trust scores with customers so that you're building up that better knowledge around customers? Maybe it's proactively looking for fraud using contact center insights. Actually going out where we've talked about there's not much there. Are you specifically going to see where there are some linkages? Maybe you're educating customers in account security. That was the final point on the trends that I just shared. Maybe it's something else. Please do share it in the chat. And maybe you've got knowledge-based authentication going on, or maybe you just don't know. Maybe it's just not part of your part of the contact center. So hopefully you've had a chance to go through that. I know there's a lot to take in there. But what measures is your contact center taking to tackle fraud? So 3, 2, 1, let's have a look at the results. Okay, a lot of measures. Interestingly, only 1% building trust scores of customers. And I'm sure there's a whole session we could do around that. Training the front line in how to spot fraudsters. I suspect there's also an element of helping the front line when they have spotted a fraudster, what they do next. I think that's really, really key. Tim, I'm going to come to you quickly. What's your view on these results?
I'm just having a look through it now, and I think, firstly, I think it's good to see that there's a good balance across the different layers that we would recommend. So that's reassuring to see. It's also interesting to see voice biometrics kind of dropping down a little bit, because we are seeing in the market a switch from authentication techniques in isolation to threat and trust techniques, predominantly around the impact that biometric failure can have on servicing customers. So I think that's an interesting reduction. And the second thing is how many people are still using knowledge-based authentication. And it'd be very interesting to understand from people that may have selected that as an option, is if that's because they don't have anything else yet, and therefore they have to still rely on something, whether it be information that you've already got within your system about a person, like recent transacting behavior, or whether it be something you're procuring from credit bureaus or keys records holders. So that is quite interesting. It's great that people are looking at what data is available and how they can glean insights on that. That for me is probably the most important thing. Is don't switch off from any data. All data can be valuable. You just don't know when. And the fact that you're looking at insights around that but specifically for how you manage risk in the contact center, that is a very good sign that a lot of you are there. Although the only thing I would say, Lee, nothing, I think, with the exception of training, is over 50%. And that is still worrying, that it looks like the strategies at the moment don't have all those layers truly embedded. But it is very good that agent empowerment remains a priority focus. I think that you can't emphasize enough how important it is to empower the agents with the right information at the right time to manage the right risks.
I think, Tim, there's another layer to that. So one of the comments in the chat is no action being taken, which kind of leads into what you've just said there. And interestingly, when I see how many people actually responded to that question, actually it's less than half actually answered that question, or about half. So I think it's interesting that maybe some people are just listening in as opposed to participating in the poll. But maybe actually I should have had that question. We're doing nothing, which is a little bit scary. Mark, I have to ask you, I'm going to come back to, I've mentioned it a couple of times, that balancing of customer service and that fraud detection. And in particular, you're the financial crime manager. So you don't work in the contact center,
No.
but tell us about your relationship with the contact center and what your views and what your experiences are of that balance between that customer service and trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, so first of all, the size of our organisation is such that I can engage directly with a lot of these people. We have staff in Manila. We have staff in the UK. Manila, obviously, they provide our out of hours service. So we can really engage closely with them. And actually, one of the conversations I had this morning was, we are increasing friction in a certain area because I feel there is a need to tighten up those fraud controls a little bit. And what that's going to do, that's going to cause friction, as in the term friction is as in it makes it more difficult for something to happen, but it also causes friction as in it annoys people. We live in a world where we want everything to happen instantly. The level of frauds where people are victims of fraud as well, and the percentage where you can go back to your bank or whatever and say, I'd like my money back because someone's defrauded me. We kind of live in a world now where there's an expectation things are just going to happen quickly, and to a large extent there is a lack of ownership by the people on the other end by our people who may become victims. So we've really got to acknowledge that, because for organisations to be competitive, you need to provide a good customer experience. But by the same token, you need to build that friction in. And from that friction point of view, things like 3D Secure, one of the things I'm regularly looking at, my team are looking at, do we need to adjust scoring matrices when you maybe see, one day you don't have to put a code in, spend £15, then you do. Actually, it might be because in the background, someone like me has made a change. And we communicate that with our contact centers, and also let them, we don't go into too much detail about how it all works, because actually there's quite sensitive information, but actually an understanding that we do recalibrate these things, and we seek that feedback as well from the contact center. And it's not just the head of the contact center, it's the team leaders, it's the trainers, it's what they're hearing, because actually what's coming back from the victims, the card holders, is actually really quite important. So we really need to find that balance, because if you completely nail down your controls, you will not have any customers. And it is a real difficult balance to gauge. And part of that is actually finding out from the contact center, what is the impact on the customers? Many ways of doing that. And one of the ways is customer surveys and what have you. So it's really important to find that balance and to make sure that friction is right. But in short, small organization, you can engage very, very closely with your contact center staff, and you can become kind of hybrid. We are to an extent customer service, and customer service to an extent fraud. But when you get to big organizations, it doesn't work that way. There are so many people. You get your annual training, your anti-money laundering training, fraud training, your insider threat training, but it becomes very, very difficult to properly sort of bridge those gaps as it gets bigger. But it just means you've just got different tools available. You tend to have a bigger budget to maybe look at some of the more technical tools to protect you.
Thank you, Mark. And interestingly, one of the comments that has come into the chat to us around what organisations are doing, sticky coaching on how to spot the fraudster, the scammer, which connects emotionally with the coachee. Scam quiz, no, sorry, I can't say it. Scam savvy quiz, such to develop the skills to spot scams such as marketplace, etc. Weekly insight review, sharing best practice with agents. And all colleagues coached every 14 days on skills to help break the spell. I like that one. There is another question that's come in. Fraudsters are using voice changes to disguise their true voice and trying to match the voice of the customer or the customer's profile, like age and gender. Is this rise in voice changes widespread? And what are the best things to tackle this? Tim, I'm going to ask you that question. Is this widespread?
Yes, it's a big problem, and actually it's becoming a bigger problem where organisations have outsourced in the contact centre. We're under no illusion that dialect, age, tone, they're all different things that become even more difficult as we move servicing around the globe of our customers. This is extremely common. Everyone is talking about this at the moment. One very good way of combating this is to be able to make sure that you're pairing audio analysis with signaling analysis. If I just give you a real life example of this, if you are identifying, for example, or if a voice changer is being used, in the signaling layer, there are delays that you can detect in the network information because to basically confirm there is a piece of software intercepting, altering, and then re-injecting that particular audio. Now, it's very difficult to detect that in what I would consider presented data to an agent, because an agent doesn't see any of this, right? So it's very important that the technology or the providers that you're working with are able to in-stream identify when this injection occurs. But also behind that, there is often a spoofed number or a number that's been generated by a VoIP service that has is able to spin these up and shut them down very, very quickly, and often comes from either a high-risk VoIP provider or comes from a different country around the world. What we've seen success in is around triangulating the relevance of those different attributes and providing that in a more instructional, educational format that you can embed into your CRM. So if you're running a CRM, you have the ability for this information to be passed in real time, and for pop-ups to be managed with agents to say, warning, we've detected this, right? That, in my opinion, completely changes the dynamic for an agent, because you're telling them that you've detected something that means that you're allowing them to do something different with that caller. Now, each one of you will have a different view as to what treatment that means, what trade-off in terms of risk versus experience you're prepared to have. But if you can trust that data and be told that that data means something has occurred and therefore you need to do something different with the caller, that is a very powerful thing. So the one thing I would just say, because I'm conscious of time, is a lot of investment now in our space is about building bots to find bots, as opposed to building models to find risk, and then layering risk models on top of the detection of bots so that they're contextually relevant to the things that you're trying to enable your customers to do. This is going to get worse. In the last 12 months, we've gone from 1 in 500 calls to being 1 in 300 calls being fraudsters in the call center. So that ratio is coming down, but it's still a tiny minutiae of calls that agents handle, which is why education and training is so important, because you might only get one of those calls every 6 to 8 weeks. So we have to take that heavy lifting away from the agent and provide the empowerment. So that a very high level view, but that's something I would recommend.
Thank you, Tim. And do you know what? There is a question that's talked about postal interception is on the rise. So fraudsters access personal details and any account details that they may have. How can this be effectively investigated and prevented? I guess the short answer is go digital, but actually it's quite dangerous there too. So it's I guess it's looking at how you protect your customers. That question and some of the others that I know we haven't got to, we will ask the panel to answer, and we will share those answers. So please rest assured your questions will be answered. But I've got 2 last questions for you. First of all, to you, Tim, what's coming down the track? what are the new scams that you are starting to see that may well hit the contact centre in the coming weeks, months? What's happening, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things that we're seeing more and more of is the attack life cycle is moving longer from a fraudster perspective, and they're going cross industry. So we're now actually seeing a lot of movement away from having the same phone number targeting multiple accounts. We're seeing a movement to burner phones and phone numbers being used only ever once. And what that's really done for a lot of legacy fraud tools that focus on caller risk is it's needed to move away. There's a need to move away from caller risk profiling to customer risk profiling in the context of a caller. And what I mean by that is looking at the velocity of calls from different numbers to a single customer rather than the velocity of calls from a single number to multiple customers. And that's been very difficult for organizations that often deploy these capabilities in IVRs pre-ID, where you don't know who customers are and you're trying to protect your data. When burner phones or single-use phones through things like VoIP are used, it becomes very, very difficult to protect data. So we've seen certain markets have to increase the number of ICO submissions for data leaks, where they've subsequently realized that data has been leaked or given away via a telephony channel. And so that's definitely an area that people are very worried about at the moment. And what's the cost of reputational damage if the number of reported leaks was to be published for their business? Do they have the right posture in place? The second one, I think the participants have already covered, which is voice changing. This is massive at the moment. But what I would say is that we're seeing fraudsters testing the boundaries of your perimeter fence and working out how to exploit it. What I do think is that the area that you'll see that real rise in terms of crime is going to be when you all start to introduce workflow and self-service and chat capabilities on the voice channel in anger. And they are definitely waiting for you to do that. And this technology is definitely being tested right now. And it's not a UK problem, everywhere, in every language. And it's absolutely rife. Every single seminar, every single event that I'm going to at the moment and talking to various people around the world, they are worried about this. They are seeing this. Their agents are suffering from this. It is becoming difficult to navigate vulnerability conversations. So you absolutely need to have a plan for how you scale to that when you start to introduce more self-service.
Thank you, Tim. Wow. This has been a fascinating conversation. I have to turn it back to us as individuals. And Pauline, I'm going to lean into you for the last piece of advice for today. Now, we are all susceptible to fraud as individuals. Pauline, what advice would you give us as individuals listening in to how we can protect ourselves?
Yeah, thanks, Lee. So, yeah, we all are. And if anybody around the virtual table thinks that they can't be defrauded, trust me, you can. So we're all in time squeeze. We're all doing things. And it's like yesterday, very quickly, stop, think fraud, take 5. If it is too good to be true, trust me, it's going to be good to be true. And think about that in everything that you do. I even mean things like job applications. There's job application fraud, believe it or not. So if you've got that job at £140,000, then just take a look around and it's just stop and think about it. And in terms of, organisations, data security will be the difference moving forward, and customers using your service of the future will choose or not to choose to use it if their data isn't secure. So it used to be customer service. Now it's really data security.
Thank you so much, Pauline. And if anybody has been affected by fraud, please do contact Action Fraud and report it. This has been a fascinating, slightly fast-paced conversation. I just want to say a huge thank you to Pauline, to Mark, and to Tim for being on the panel. I want to say a huge thank you to you guys for all of your comments and questions. Anything we haven't answered, we will, as I say, document, and we shall make sure that becomes available. So thank you for your participation, and a huge thank you to Smart Numbers for helping us actually bring you this session today. So I hope you have a safe afternoon, and thank you so much. We'll see you soon.